Welcome to our forum on poisoned land, poisoned water, the story of ground and water pollution in and around Badin, North Carolina. This is a presentation of the Reimagine America project, which is dedicated to the eradication of systemic racism. I am Jim Beard, co-chair of the Environmental Justice Committee. This evening, you will be hearing information from various individuals involved in the situation concerning pollution in the Badin and Badin Lake area. This forum comes from the Environmental Justice Committee, which deals with racial inequalities, inequities in environmental policies and actions which adversely affect Brown and Black communities. The focus of tonight's forum will be on the general pollution situation, while the forum on March 20th will look more closely at racial issues. Our forum tonight will be moderated by the Reverend Janet Garner Mullins. Reverend Garner Mullins has a Master of Divinity degree from Hood Theological Seminary in Salisbury, North Carolina, and has both a master's and bachelor's degree from the University of Phoenix. She is a retired insurance claims professional and is now a public inspirational and motivational speaker, as well as a social justice advocate. She is a faith-based ministry leader. She serves in various leadership roles, including chair of the Coalition for Truth and Justice and the vice chair of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Black Heritage Committee. Our opening prayer, along with some personal comments at a later point in the program, will be given by the Reverend Dr. Sheldon R. Shipman, pastor of the Greenville Memorial African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church of Charlotte. This denomination is known as the Freedom Church and is the denomination of Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Paul Robeson, Booker T. Washington, and Harriet Tubman. Dr. Shipman is a motivational speaker, community activist, Afrocentric educator, senior minister, and pastor for the past 40 years. He is currently in his 21st year at Greenville. Dr. Shipman is a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, has a Master of Divinity degree from Hood Theological Seminary, and completed his doctoral work at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University. We now recognize Dr. Shipman for the opening prayer.
Thank you so much, Jim. Let us bow our heads together just for a moment of prayer. All-wise and eternal creator, sustainer of all life, and the giver of life, we acknowledge you by many names, but we acknowledge you as the creator of this world in which we are blessed to live. We ask your blessings now upon this part one of poisoned land and poisoned water. And we pray, Father, that you would remind us that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and the world and all those who dwell within. O Most High, on this Thursday evening, we ask that you would give us ears to hear the information that will be shared, that it might not only impress our hearts, but it also may govern our actions now and in the future. And then give us hearts that we would be good stewards of this world, both for those who are living today and for the generations that are yet unborn. We surrender this entire session into your hands with gratitude. In the name of he who is the Most High, we ask it with gratitude and thanksgiving. And we all said together, amen. Amen.
Good evening. To our panelists, we are most thankful that you're here with us this evening. We will start with our first panelist for this evening, Reich Longus, who serves as co-director of the Duke Environmental Law and Policy Clinic, which teaches law and graduate students how to assist nonprofit environmental organizations. Before he became a clinical faculty member, Wright was a special deputy attorney general working for the North Carolina Department of Justice. During his career at the NCDOJ, Wright represented state agencies charged with protecting North Carolina's environment. Some of his research interests and specialties include air quality, criminal law, environmental justice. Wright also serves as director of clinics for Duke School of Law and has a secondary appointment to the faculty of the Nicholas School of Environment. Wright will have 10 minutes, followed by Edgar Miller, who is the Riverkeeper, executive director of the Yadkin Riverkeeper. Riverkeeper's mission is to protect and enhance the Yadkin River, its lakes and tributaries through education, advocacy, and action. Prior to working with the Yadkin Riverkeeper, Edgar served as the Director of Government Relations for the Conservation Trust for North Carolina for 17 years. As a registered lobbyist, he represented the NC Land Trust before the NC General Assembly and U.S. Congress, advocating for increased conservation funding and tax incentive. Edgar holds a BA in botany from Duke University and a master's of environmental management from Duke's Nicholas School of the Environment. He has 5 minutes for his presentation. Our next panelist will be Colleen McDaniel. Colleen is co-president of Protect Badin Lake and a recent board appointee for the Yadkin Riverkeepers. She is the owner of the Inspired Garden, Inc., an environmentally focused landscape design and contracting business in operation since 2005. She's a North Carolina licensed general building and landscape contractor and a certified North Carolina stormwater inspector. She has a bachelor's degree in fine art from UNC Charlotte. And she states, building beautiful and ecologically minded spaces for learning, playing, and living has been a fulfilling art and career foundation. She also states, it is a privilege and also a challenge to get folks to better understand systems of ecology and the landowner's role in an excellent steward and being an excellent steward of the earth. She also has 5 minutes. Our final panelist for the evening will be Dr. Libby McClure, who is a health data analyst with DataWorks NC, a Durham-based nonprofit whose mission is to conduct community-driven research. And she's also a research associate with the North Carolina Occupational Safety and Health Education and Research Center at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She has been collaborating with the concerned citizens of Badin, West Badin, and the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network on a community-led research since 2016. Her work is focused on the ways in which historical and structural inequalities produce health disparities. She seeks involvement in social and environmental justice-focused research that both critically complicates traditional study of health and illnesses, while also supporting social change. And she has 5 minutes. And now I will turn it over to Wright for his presentation.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, and it is my honor to be here with you all today to talk about some important matters. I am to give you the overview, history, and legal landscape of Badin, West Badin, and Alcoa's Badin Works. We're not going to start at the beginning of history. Humans have been in the Badin area, documented through artifacts, at least 10,000 to 12,000 years. But beginning in 1913, a French company, Aluminum Française, began the process of building an aluminum manufacturing facility, and they named the town Badin after one of the engineers for the French aluminum company. But the Tallahassee Power Company, which was a subsidiary of Alcoa, purchased all of the assets from the Aluminum Française in the 1915 timeframe. By 1920, Alcoa was, through Tallahassee Power Company, actively recruiting a workforce and building a company town around the Badin plant. And the Badin Bulletin from 1920, there are excerpts on this slide from that Badin Bulletin, was specifically a newspaper that helped advise people about what was going on in the town, but was also promoting the town and directly recruiting a Black workforce into a portion of the town, segregated portion of this company town that was specifically designed and built for the use of the Black workforce. And they actively recruited that into what was called the Colored Village, or North Badin. It also happens to be on the northwest side of Badin. This excerpt from the Badin Bulletin on the right explains a little bit of how they were promoting this as a opportunity for workers to purchase their own home from the company over time. This picture down in the lower left corner of this slide, this picture in the upper left corner shows some of the homes that were being advertised in the Badin Bulletin on the west side of Badin. On the west side of Badin, in this village, the names of the streets were after generals. On the east side of Badin, the names of the streets are after plant species. This is the plant itself, as shown from a 1938 aerial in the lower left corner, and West Badin is over here in the lower left. East Badin is over in the right. For the next 5 and 7 decades, aluminum production went on at Badin, and 4 dams, started with 1 dam and went to 4 dams that created the electricity that was needed to power all of this activity. Along comes, and the settlement patterns, as we can see in this demographic picture on the left of this slide, shows you the segregation of the company town as it is today. So the legacy of that segregation that began in the 1920s continues in settlement patterns today, with this picture on the left side showing more recent census data at the tract level to show you how it is at the census block level. How West Badin is still today a segregated town. It's no longer segregated at law, but it is segregated factually. And we have an African-American population who have built businesses, built homes, and lived in this area now for decades and on through generations and generations of workers. In 1989, Alcoa, together with a group called Better Badin, Inc., designed a process for the incorporation of the town and the ending of the company town. It wasn't until 1989 that the town was turned over to become from a private company town to being a public town. But when it was created, the town was divided into 2 residential voting districts, West Badin and East Badin. So the General Assembly is the one that condoned this in 1989. And they gave voting power upon recommendation of the committee, gave voting power in such a way that West Badin gets 1 resident elected to the town council, East Badin gets another, but 3 are elected at large. And since the African-American and West Badin population is a smaller portion of the overall population of Badin, this has adversely affected the representation of West Badin on the town council. The General Assembly also took away a power that's commonly given to towns, and that is the power to regulate industrial activity. On the right, you can see the excerpts from the law that was passed in 1989 that enacted these injustices. During this time, aluminum was being smelted. The lower left is an illustration of how an aluminum smelting pot is created. The upper right shows you what happens after smelting has gone on for a period of time. There's a waste product that's created. In the lower left, this waste product starts out as pure carbon blocks. But over time, impurities from the alumina ore, can be any form of metal that might be in the raw ore, ends up in these carbon cathodes. Also, cyanide is formed in that same process, and fluoride comes out of this electrolyte solution. So we have a combination of fluoride, cyanide, heavy metals, and something called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Many of these are very hazardous chemicals that we think of in things like creosote, coal tar pitch. the spent pot liner you see here being jackhammered out of one of these liners is produced in large volumes each and every year from every one of these facilities. PCBs are also on the property as a result of the high volume of electricity that has to be used. This is an aerial photograph taken from one of the RCRA, one of the cleanup maps that was produced by consultants, showing 3 areas on the property that have the largest concentration of that spent pot liner that is buried underground in unlined dumps. They are called North Plant Groundwater, Alcoa Badin Landfill, and Old Brick Landfill. They're numbered 1, 2, and 3. These are the largest dumps on the site, and they're still here, covered with dirt on hillsides, but not protected from the elements. As we see today, I'm going to show you just the North Plant. This is of the 3, 2 of them are located in the area known as West Badin. The third is in a remote location away from humans on the east side of the highway. So it would technically be in East Badin, but it has actually not got any neighbors. The North Plant groundwater is a place where waste was just dumped into low-lying areas off the back end of the existing storage areas. And it was right next to this area where swimming and recreation takes place. So this hazardous waste facility that we're talking about is directly adjacent to the areas where recreation and swimming took place on Badin Lake, which is of concern. This shows some of the topography. These are showing where dumping occurred on the north end. And it shows the direction in which spent pot liner had been dumped, and cyanide and fluoride is leaching out of it. These are not lined landfills. They are covered landfills, but the bedrock is flowing towards the lake in this northern portion. And with that, I will turn it over to a next speaker to give you some more details about the next topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Reich. I'm Edgar Miller. I'm the Executive Director and Riverkeeper for Yadkin Riverkeeper. As Reverend Garner Mullen said, our mission is to protect and enhance the Yadkin River, its tributaries, and its lakes. Badin Lake is one of a series of man-made lakes. Reich mentioned the development of the aluminum smelter site in 1917. The Narrows Dam was constructed to create Badin Lake, which is about a 5,000 acre lake, the second largest lake in the chain that includes High Rock and Tuckertown. Let me see here if I can share my screen. Get it to do the slideshow. Hang on just a second. All right, this is a current view of the plant today. This site has been decommissioned. They stopped doing aluminum smelting there in around 2007. But as Reich mentioned, over a 100-year period of time, they did produce aluminum there and generated and buried hazardous waste that has been defined now as hazardous by the Environmental Protection Agency. And so our role, initially, Yadkin Riverkeeper was very involved in the FERC relicensing of the dams along the river. And we did oppose that and worked with others to try and get some concessions for water quality. We ultimately lost that battle, and Alcoa did get the license that has now been transferred to Cube Hydro. So they are no longer actually running the dams in the river, but they do own this property and continue this operation there in terms of trying to clean up the legacy that's been left there. My job today is to just talk briefly about the environmental permits that has allowed us an opportunity to engage on this issue from advocacy standpoint and to try and do what we can to ensure Alcoa is held accountable for the waste that they disposed of there in the unlined trenches. Right now, we are focused on the stormwater discharge permit that is required by the Clean Water Act. That is issued by the State Department of Environmental Quality's Division of Water Resources, and essentially regulates what Alcoa is allowed to discharge through a variety of different stormwater outfalls. And I know that sounds strange that somehow this large contaminated site, industrial site, is allowed to actually discharge contaminated stormwater into Badin Lake, Yadkin River, and Little Mountain Creek, and of course the groundwater. That existing permit was expired in October of last year, and we are in the process of making recommendations and trying to work with the state to make that a better permit to be more protective of public health and water quality. The second major permit that has jurisdiction over this particular site is the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act Corrective Action Permit. This is required for addressing past waste contamination at the site. It's in the same State Department, North Carolina Division of Environmental Quality, Division of Waste Management. But as Wright noted, we have hazardous waste that at the time it was buried was not considered hazardous by the federal government, but subsequently has been determined that is what is at this site. And that does give us concern that it is leaching into the groundwater and to the lake and Little Mountain Creek, which flows in the Lake Tillery, and that is the drinking water supply for Montgomery County. This site is not under Superfund, and that is a very long and complicated conversation and discussion. There are many of us who feel like perhaps it should have been put under Superfund, but we know who the responsible party is here. So we feel pretty confident that if we can get the state to do the right thing and force Alcoa to clean up these waste sites, that we'll be hopefully correcting the problems that have been there for the last 100 years. Just a few quick maps. These are the so-called solid waste management units that Reich mentioned earlier, some 44 of these sites where there was known hazardous waste buried during the operation of the facility. Reich pointed out the old brick landfill, the ball field, and then the Alcoa Badin landfill, which is just about off of this map here. These are the permitted outfalls, and as you can see, this is where Alcoa monitors what's being discharged into Badin Lake here. This is outfall 2 right at the public boat access ramp, outfall 13, which goes right into the public swimming area, and outfall 12, which is a mixing zone, and I'll talk briefly about that and some concerns we have there. The largest compliance issues have been associated with outfall 05, where there have been exceedances of fluoride and cyanide, 2 of the few chemicals that are actually monitored for by the state or required. And here's Little Mountain Creek and the town or the community of West Badin. And so when you see the overlap between the outfalls, which in this case are the yellow squares, and the solid waste management units, the hazardous waste burial areas, you see a great deal of overlap and a concern in proximity, and you really could not find a more or worse place to put and dispose of hazardous waste with all this water around. I mentioned the concept of a mixing zone. The state actually allows them to discharge this contaminated stormwater into an area where their initial concentrations can be up to 50 times greater than the ambient water quality for cyanide. This, once again, is adjacent to the public swimming area, the public boat access area. And we are very concerned about acute levels of cyanide impacting swimmers in this area who might ingest the water. And obviously concerned about ultimately the long-term impact on the river and the lake itself. And we really do not think this is a appropriate area for this type of pollution. The solution to pollution is dilution. We also got involved with a consent order that they were going to divert contaminated water from outfall 5 and put it here in outfall 12. And we were able to rally about 350 public comments, and ultimately the state decided not to go that route. Just very quickly, some of our ongoing concerns, once again, discharge of this contaminated water. Actually, outfall 13 is right over here by the swimming area. And so sometimes we'll see spikes of cyanide, and families could be in there with their kids at that time. This contaminated water is leaching out of those landfills and into Badin Lake and Little Mountain Creek, contaminating groundwater. Right now, Alcoa is only required to monitor for 5 pollutants, and they only have limits on 2. So some things they monitor, but they aren't limited on how much they can be discharging. They have had 16 violations of their water quality permit for fluoride since August of 2019, and 5 violations of cyanide since August 2019. And they have exceeded some of their benchmarks for aluminum. Just seven fines have been issued during this time frame for the whopping sum of $8,000. We have made a series of recommendations working with RIKE and the Southern Environmental Law Center. We want to see the site cleaned up before there are any future permit applications for further discharge. That is going on right now. We want to see more frequent testing for cyanide and fluoride and monitoring for a wider range of contaminants, some of the things that RIKE mentioned in his presentation. We want to use a lab that can detect down to the actual standards and the actual limits that are set in the permit. And Alcoa has played a lot of different number games to try to make sure they're meeting the standards, but they still have had exceedances and violations as noted. And we want to see the discharges eliminated altogether into the swimming areas and into the public access areas. And obviously with the level of public interest in this, we want to see a public hearing before any permit is issued for the stormwater. Just wrapping up, the next phase after the stormwater permit goes through its process, we will be looking at the RCRA permit, the hazardous waste permit. What are we going to do about cleaning up this site? There are ecological risk assessments being conducted now. We believe those will be hopefully finalized corrective action plans later this year. Alcoa did remove 2,000 tons of contaminated soil in October of 21 to address some of the fluoride contamination, but that has not fully worked as they continue to have exceedances of fluoride at outfall 5. And we would like to see the most dangerous sites at the top of this photograph is the Alcoa Badin landfill that RIKE highlighted earlier. So we would like to see these solid waste units excavated and that removed to a proper storage area. And ultimately, we feel like we've got to figure out what does environmental justice mean for the West Badin community that has been disproportionately impacted by this over the years. So Colleen has worked with Protect Badin Lake, and I'll hand it off to her to give their perspective.
Hello, and thank you. It's really an honor to be here and sharing this discussion with everybody. Protect Badin Lake is a nonprofit organization that acts as a watchdog, and we're trying to keep Alcoa from dumping more poison into the lake. Going to share a screen with you. We have been effective in what our goals are so far. Protect Badin Lake has began in October 2020 when several community members recognized that Alcoa wanted to divert more cyanide and fluoride into Badin Lake from the outfall that flows into Little Mountain Creek. Alcoa submitted a permit application requesting that the outfall be diverted into Badin Lake, emptying the documented toxic levels of cyanide and fluoride directly into the lake. Cyanide and fluoride are the only 2 chemicals that are being monitored currently with limits. We have no official information about what else is in the lake also. Several community members decided to meet regularly via Zoom to brainstorm how we can use our resources to make sure that this permit was not approved. We were able to gather over 5,000 signatures on a petition we presented to DEQ. The permit was denied. We also marched that petition to the governor's office. Protect Badin Lake committee members have been meeting ever since. Our committee consists of Jen Caldwell, the other co-president, myself, as one of the co-presidents, Nikki Gafinowitz is treasurer, and Kathy Brown and Rose Hammer. Our members have reached out to politicians on both sides of the aisle, and they know that we are aware, engaged, and educated about the pollution. Our goal is to make sure that the Badin Lake community, as well as Lake Tillery community, stays informed and updated about our water quality. Currently, we are waiting for NCDEQ to announce a public comment period to address Alcoa's newly submitted NPDES permit. Protect Badin Lake, Yadkin Riverkeeper, and concerned citizens of West Badin have all read the submitted application and have documented our objections to the state. The state does not have to announce a public comment period. However, they have acknowledged increased concerns expressed by the community. The last time a public comment period was offered, over 350 community members shared their objections to the outfall that is flowing into Little Mountain Creek diversion into Badin Lake, and the state denied that proposal. Currently, we have about 250 people on our email list, and we send updates to them for important issues. If you'd like to get on our email list, our email address is protectbadinlake@gmail.com. We also have a Nextdoor account, a Facebook page, and a web page. Please be on the watch for a public comment period so that you can help support us. We will be asking our community to either send an email, a letter, or call NCDEQ to express objection to the permit. Our 5 main objections to the permit as submitted are: remove outfall 5 because for several years, more pollutants have spewed out than the current limits allow. Number 2, remove outfall 12 and 13. They're both located at inappropriate places. Number 3, develop and execute a plan to remove the sources of contaminants or treat the pollution prior to the expiration of the new permit, the new NPDES permit. Number 4, test for additional contaminants and require more precise testing results, including requiring Alcoa, also known as Alcoa's Badin Business Park, ABBP, to use certified labs that can report more accurate results. And finally, we want them to, in the interim, hold ABBP accountable by implementing maximum fines for violations. And I can turn it over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Libby McClure, and I'm here with many of the members of the Concerned Citizens of West Badin. And you'll hear from one of the founding members, Mr. Macy Henson, at the next session. And I want to start by saying that several of the Concerned Citizens of West Badin worked at the Alcoa plant for 30+ years. For generations lived in the community near the Alcoa plant, and they've been organizing around the contamination in their community for decades. And they've seen firsthand what Alcoa has done. And they've gone to every political level, and they've still been fighting the same fight. And when I spoke to one of the other founding members of Concerned Citizens of West Badin, she said, "We've lost so many people while fighting this, yet still telling the stories over and over again. We're frustrated because it feels like they're waiting for us to die out. And Alcoa has never claimed responsibility." So I was asked to give an overview of the health impacts of the contamination in Badin. So I'm going to give a brief summary of the research that I've collaborated with the Concerned Citizens of West Badin on, in hopes of holding Alcoa accountable. And I'll try to illustrate the extent of work that we've done to show what Ms. Valerie means when she says they've gone to every political level fighting this fight for the past several years. So in 2013, the Concerned Citizens of West Badin joined the state network of environmental justice organizations, the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network. And in 2015, one of the directors of the NCEJN, Naima Muhammad, as well as human geographer Pavitra Vasudevan, conducted oral history interviews in collaboration with the Concerned Citizens of West Badin. In 2016, Pavitra wrote a play based on those interviews called Race and Waste in an Aluminum Town. And it was performed near Badin, followed by an open discussion. At that open discussion, community members reported that the least desirable jobs in the plant, mostly working in the pot room, were most frequently assigned to Black workers. Former workers also mentioned that the 25-year club, which came with some corporate benefits, was only open to Black workers after the establishment of the Badin United Steelworkers Local 303 division. But it was often referred to as the graveyard because so many workers died after working in the plant that long. In 2017, Ms. Valerie Tyson, Mr. Richard Leake, and Mr. Macy Henson visited UNC Chapel Hill to speak with the environmental justice course. They shared their stories about working at the Alcoa plant with public health students. And with her, Ms. Valerie brought a scrapbook of the Black community in Badin. It included inductees into the 25-year club, graduation and wedding announcements, as well as several obituaries. The Concerned Citizens of West Badin first raised the questions motivating my dissertation research, which was, were Black workers disproportionately exposed to job-related toxins and hazards that cause disease and death? And at that point, no mortality or disease differences in work exposures at Alcoa's Badin facility had been researched, and no research had been done to examine disparate work exposures by race and aluminum in the aluminum industry. So we were able to access seniority records from the United Steelworkers. We collected name, age, race, sex, and work history for all union members between 1980 and 2002. We linked those records with the National Death Index to analyze differences in mortality and cancer mortality by race and sex, and time worked in the pot room. We published a scientific article documenting this analysis, and it shows that there has been excess cancer mortality among Black workers and pot room workers relative to the general population of North Carolina. At the same time, we developed a household survey project. Pavitra and I drafted initial surveys, and the Concerned Citizens chose survey questions to give feedback, broader qualitative experiential information. Members of the Concerned Citizens helped train young members of the West Badin community on survey administration. And we surveyed 25 people thus far. In 2018, I gained access to Alcoa's company records and analyzed jobs at hire by race and sex at the Badin plant between 1985 and 2007. Members of the Concerned Citizens of West Badin helped me review all of the job titles in the company data and identify which ones were the most dangerous. We were able to publish this analysis in a scientific journal in 2020. It shows that Black workers were the most likely to be hired into undesirable jobs and the least likely to transition out of them. In 2019, the Concerned Citizens of West Badin hosted the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network's quarterly meeting. Communities with similar struggles came from all over the state in solidarity. Ms. Valerie, Mr. Richard, and Mr. Macy shared their stories and answered questions. And also in 2019, some members of the Concerned Citizens and I presented the motivation and methods for the household survey at the annual Environmental Justice Summit. And finally, at the end of 2019, the Concerned Citizens organized around a DEQ public hearing about cleanup of the Alcoa dumping sites. And community members discussed a history of neglect of toxic waste in Badin. In 2020, Undark magazine published an article about Badin, including interviews with Macy Henson, Valerie Tyson, and others on this call. And currently we have ongoing work with the 25 surveys that I mentioned. There are 25 surveys with workers or family members of workers at the plant in Badin. Nearly everyone we've talked to experienced toxic work exposures, overt racism at work, and cancer in their family. Some students at UNC Chapel Hill, Sherelle Manley and Tekka, are analyzing the survey responses, and some survey themes that have emerged already are community distrust, various coping methods with the toxins that Alcoa released into the community, several environmental exposures, a long list of health issues related to those exposures, many job-related exposures to the agents that Reich mentioned at the beginning, including PCBs, as well as extreme heat, dust, asbestos, as well as injuries and workplace violence. Also, there's a large theme of loss in the community, loss of work and loss of community members. And so with that, I hope you join us at the next session where you can hear from Macy Henson and the concerned citizens of West Badin.
Thank you, all panel and members and speakers, for this informative information that you have shared with us. We thank you for your time and for your compassion and passion about this most important and impactful situation that has taken place, and it continues to take place in Badin. And we will now turn it over to Jennifer. I'm sorry, not Jennifer, but Dr. Shipman, excuse me, for him to share a personal moment.
Thank you so much, Reverend. I will keep my remarks relatively short. This has been a very provoking, informational webinar thus far. When I was asked to just share it, every time I think about this now, it even causes me a little bit more concern than I had when my cousin died. I'm just sharing a very, very dear, wonderful lady who was a member of our family, lived in Badin, North Carolina. I had no idea I was going to be able to share this until it was being discussed, and I have someone who has impacted my life. She was a mother of 4 children, married 57 years. She was a teacher, basketball coach, as well as my mother's favorite cousin, and naturally became my favorite cousin, lived on Badin Lake. Lived there for a number of years. Of course, they began to hear rumors about Alcoa and all of the things that were beginning to go into the water. They decided to move, still stayed in Badin. Eventually, they moved completely away to Albemarle, trying to remove themselves from the effects. But having talked to her widow husband, and this is a picture of her. This is my cousin. Just want you to know this is, and I had to attend the funeral and also did the obituary and the eulogy. Died from cancer. And one of many neighbors in that particular West Badin, Badin Lake, that entire area, who've had numerous members of their family who have passed away from different types of cancer. And of course, there's been no relief given because the proof is always a little bit abstract when you actually go back, but when you look at how the environment has been impacted, and it affects people, and people are dying. And I just want to call her name, Mrs. Agnes Mask, died on June the 18th, 2020. And it was not COVID related, it was cancer related. So that's just something I wanted to share. It's a little emotional for me again, because it's another health disparity that has taken place due to what I call environmental injustice. So thank you all for just letting me share. And remember my cousin, Agnes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Shipman, for sharing a personal moment with us. Our thoughts and prayers will continue to be with your family as you all process this grief, even though it took place what may seem like a long time ago, but it wasn't.
Yes. right?
just in
10
2020.
years ago.
Yes.
you.
Thank you for sharing that personal experience. We will now turn it over to Jennifer for our Q&A.
Thank you, Reverend Garner Mullins and Dr. Shipman for that touching personal connection to the tragedy that we've heard about around Badin Lake and around a large corporate polluter that I think is a multi-billion-dollar corporation that has not been held accountable enough. And thank you to our panelists for your detailed explanation of the advocacy that has happened, of the lack of compliance that this corporation continues to exhibit, and of the harm. We're going to turn to audience questions, and there are some terrific ones that are coming in. And if we want to get all our panelists back on the screen, because, you know, whoever wants to answer some of these, the most obvious one, been asked by a couple of different folks, is why aren't there warning signs? No swimming. Like, why is when we see where the discharge is going in, and we see how close it is to the beaches, is this just something that the state is not aware of? Are the residents aware? I think Rodney Sadler put it the best when he said, why have they not declared the lake a hazard and forced strenuous efforts to close and clean and keep people away from the hazard? So I'll just let whoever wants to answer that one go right ahead and let us know why that hasn't happened.
I can give a partial answer, but I want to be clear. I want to make sure that other voices can be heard on this, because I honestly think the concerned citizens of West Badin are the best ones to answer, since many residents know better than to eat fish from the lake and know better than to go fishing or boating in the lake. But the people from surrounding community who didn't grow up in the shadow of this facility don't know what's out there. Alcoa itself did sue the state of North Carolina's Public Health Division when they issued a fish consumption advisory on the lake for PCBs that were contained within the fish. There is a PCB, or is a fish consumption advisory in effect on the lake, but the signs are small and hard to find. And the state of North Carolina seems to be taking a relatively absurd position that something is fishable even if you shouldn't eat the fish. So the question of swimming and boating is one that I cannot answer, except that the biggest financial incentive that was focused around, say, 20 years ago and up to the past 10 years was the relicensing matter that Edgar mentioned, which was worth something like $500 million to Alcoa in the end. And relicensing required demonstration that this could be a recreational lake. So they're keeping recreation going on the lake as part of that requirement under the FERC license. Why the state of North Carolina is not, I think the bigger question is, honestly, why hasn't the state of North Carolina ordered Alcoa to dig up the causes of this hazardous waste that's leaching out? We have 3 very large dumps that have hazardous waste in them that have been covered with dirt but have not been excavated, and they are not protecting the environment. And we have these outfalls where the pollution is being allowed to be discharged into the lake to continue to add to the burden that's there. And we know there are other hazardous materials besides just spent pot liner that are associated, including these PCBs. So there are fish consumption advisories out there. People don't know about them. They fish anyway. I would not myself swim in this area. There was a risk assessment done, and it basically was, if a person swam, they would in the lake, they would not swallow more than a certain amount. I think it was about a tablespoon per swimming lap, and based on that, that would not be enough to make you sick. So there was an early assessment done, but there has not been an actual epidemiological test of that. It was a modeling exercise. There's lots more I could say, but we have lots of other voices, and I want to make sure that they have an opportunity to speak.
Yeah, in terms of the general water quality in the lake, we have very limited data. Most of the lake right now is still below the state's ambient water quality standards for freshwater lakes. So that's a good thing. There's still hope. It still can be prevented from getting worse. But as you can see from the map behind me, Badin Lake is right in the heart of this system. And this site, as it degrades over time, regardless of what Alcoa tries to do to stabilize it, will continue to introduce more and more of those toxins into the system. So that's why it's so important to remove the source of the contamination, and what we hope the state will require them to do.
We also have, and related to that, to the hazards of eating fish and swimming, we have a couple questions about health, and maybe Dr. McClure or Colleen can answer. Have residents been tested for blood levels of cyanide and other things? And another question, have there been any links to birth defects for pregnant mothers who were near these contaminants?
So I can start. There are a number of health studies conducted in West Badin among workers at the plant. Those were conducted by Alcoa employed scientists. And I know of folks in the room with me right now can talk about times they were interviewed or pieces that were taken and used for research studies, and those results were never shared back with the community. My work has specifically been on work exposures and looking at cancer mortality. So I personally haven't done any research on birth defects or others, but there have been definitely reports of those kinds of diseases and illnesses in this community. And there's a vast body of epidemiologic literature documenting associations between the agents that exist in the waste from aluminum smelting and those types of health outcomes for sure.
I'd like to just add that we do have the fish consumption signs. They are almost illegible right now. They were printed so long ago. They basically are illegible, and they are in 2 languages, but we have Spanish and English, and there are a lot of other ethnicities that could be represented with signage as well. But also there is no signage that says that there are outfalls flowing into the lake in those areas at all. And as the photo that I showed and the photo that Edgar showed, as well as Wright, you see that those outfalls are coming right into the swimming areas, right into the boating launch, and into the designated fishing areas. So people are fishing and not knowing that there is water flowing directly off of that site in specific outfalls meant to drain water away from the facility. If there were signs, I think people would think differently about it. Or think twice about it. But I've lived in Badin for 3 years now, and I hardly ever see anybody that lives in Badin actually swimming in the swimming areas. I've asked people if they eat the fish that they catch there, and the answer is no. So, but I do believe that there are some communities that do eat the fish there. It might be sustenance for them. So, definitely feel like that is a huge problem. And another thing is, if people do have some sort of health effect, if they're not from the area and say it's a cyanide exposure, they may go home, their child may get sick, and they don't necessarily link it back to where they were swimming or fishing.
Absolutely. And I see that Edgar has his unmuted. Did you want to add to that, Mr.
Well, just this past weekend, the Special Olympics hosted a polar plunge at the Badin Lake swim area. And it just, I mean, what do you do? Do you just go out there with a megaphone and say, get out of the water? But I mean, it is such a beloved community recreational asset that, I see something like that, or, I see a level spike on cyanide coming into outfall 13 there. And, there might be a dad swimming there with his 2 kids when there's that spike. I mean, we just don't know when it's going to be hazardous or when it might be, acutely impacting the situation. So I just don't know. I don't know how to address that from, a public safety, health and safety standpoint.
So I need to ask the attorney this question. It seems to me that there are requirements for signage for public. And we also know from the history of environmental racism that many Black and brown people don't have access to private swimming pools. And so they are much more likely to swim in rivers, creeks, and lakes. So my question is, isn't there a legal requirement to have signage that people can read and it's not is not ancient and covered over, right?
Well, the last time that I was down there, and it has been a while, there were signs. They were very faded. They're exceptionally difficult to read and nearly impossible to understand. In response to one of the Q&As, I did put up a link to the health consultation study that only looked at exposure to polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, in fish and gave a fish consumption advisory. So I would say that the efforts by the state to warn the public of, the risks that are posed, for example, by consuming fish from the lake, have been completely and wholly inadequate. But at the end of the day, those signs that they put up, they're saying that's compliance. I don't think that's sufficient, and I don't think that's just. I mean, that's part of what our discussion here today is, to talk about not just the law, but justice. When a fish consumption advisory is posted, one of the issues in that case was, the theory was, well, all catfish and largemouth bass east of I-95 should be under a fish consumption advisory because of mercury. There's no need to add on additional warnings in specific places like Badin Lake because of PCBs. That honestly was part of the argument. And, that is one of the things that we are dealing with. But the other pollutants that are associated with spent pot liner, including polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, have not been assessed. I know when Dr. McClure was looking inside the plant walls themselves, there are all kinds of different pathways of exposure. And the West Badin community has been exposed to these pollutants through a wide variety of different routes, not just the fish, not just the swimming, not just the bathing, but the everyday breathing, the air emissions from the stacks from the plant, leaving pollutants on the ground and on their cars and in their houses. And then when people came home from work, getting their dirty work clothes washed within the household. These are all issues that I think are very important to the community. And I think they should be the ones to talk.
Well, and speaking of the community, I think Dr. McClure has someone in the room with her that she wanted to know if they could speak. And absolutely, if there's one of the residents there who wants to add to this conversation, is it Miss Valerie? We would love to hear from you.
Yes, my name is Valerie Tyson, and I'm a resident of West Badin. And just like the lawyer said, it's more than the fish. Alcoa was allowed to give contaminated brick to the citizens of Badin to underpin some of their houses, and they know that contamination was on it. Underpin their garages and put those contaminated materials around their garages and their homes. Now, getting back to those signs were up at one time, but vines and everything had grown on them. And Alcoa thought that they was really advising the people, because the Badin residents can't be down there. And just like it was stated, we don't swim down there, we don't fish down there, and we can't be down there 24/7. So therefore, they always talk about Little Mountain Creek, but there's a place called the trash pile, and that Little Mountain Creek, we don't know where it flows, but we need for Alcoa, it's places all around the West Bay area where they dump that pollution in our community. And they did it on the second shift, And those, what was those things? Exploded on the second shift, and people had no idea what was going on in our community. So Alcoa has a lot to be held accountable for. And that's what we have been fighting. And we have been fighting this and fighting this. It's not only the fish. When you put your boat inside that water, the contamination is right there. You don't have to go in the swimming area to get it. When you come up and pull up to that boat landing, you got contaminated. You are contaminated. And we tell as many people as possible that lake is contaminated. But we need a lot of signs, a lot of something to let people know that it's dangerous. It's dangerous.
Thank you so much for your impassioned explanation of how the residents are feeling. And we are going to hear from more residents at our next webinar on March 20th. But I'm wondering, Rodney asked a question about, can we take this to the governor has a racial equity task force for the environment. And is this something just in terms of signage? That's one thing. And then he also mentioned that Duke has had to remove coal ash and has been, taking soil out. Why is Alcoa not needing to do the same in terms of removing the soil? Why are they continued to allow, like you said, to dilute the pollution that continues to go into the lake? I may have mixed a few questions in there, but you all can answer. Anybody know where is the best place to advocate for the changes?
Right, you want to take we have communicated with the Environmental Justice Board, right?
Yeah, and both the concerned citizens of West Badin and the Yadkin Riverkeeper have been pleading with the state of North Carolina for more than a decade to have exactly what's been described here be done, only to basically be ignored and trotted along. In some ways, I honestly feel like Alcoa and the Division of Waste Management are more pen pals than they are regulator and regulated. I mean, here we have a situation where a polluter came in, generated thousands of tons of hazardous waste each and every year, indiscriminately placed it at locations around where people were living. And if you see they also made a very conscious decision of where people were going to live. This was a company town. It's hard for me to imagine why the state of North Carolina has not acted more forcefully. The state of New York acted much more forcefully at a similar site in Messina, New York. When Alcoa shuttered its smelter, the Icelandic government had recruited them to go over there. The Icelandic government insisted that no spent potliner be buried there at all. And Alcoa agreed. They shipped their spent potliner from the Icelandic smelter that took all the jobs from the Alcoa Badin Works. That smelter actually ships that stuff to be recycled in England on ships. The English will take that and then turn that into heavy industry that recycles the spent potliner. So they have a no burial policy at Iceland in this new facility where they replaced all these jobs. And they left this facility, put concertina wire around it, and have been just playing pen pals with the DWM and DEQ, the state agencies, ever since.
Yeah, and I may have misspoke. What I was referring to earlier is a environmental justice procedural memo that the Duke Environmental Law Clinic did on our behalf, and submitted that to the I think that went to the Secretary of DEQ and various other leaders, not the Environmental Justice and Equity Advisory Board. So I do not believe we have formally communicated with the board itself, but the state's environmental justice coordinator has drafted an environmental justice report for this, and it may be worthy to take a look at that. But we also, particularly Reich, provided extensive comments. And I don't know, Reich, if you want to say anything about the shortcomings there, but the state is basically just producing these kind of, cookie cutter environmental reports anytime they have to issue a paper or a permit that would affect the so-called EJ community. But in this case, they actually redefined the population base of the community. So they said this is not an EJ community. So I don't know, Reich, if you want to take that or.
Yeah, the short answer is that this is a small, relatively sparsely populated community. It's a small community. And there's a thing called a census tract and a thing called a census block. And if you look at a large enough area, any minority community will basically be washed out of the overall concentration. And so when DEQ did their EJ analysis last year, they ignored history. So there was no discussion of the history of systemic racism in Alcoa. And they also messed up the demographics by only looking at the largest area of census rather than the lower level areas. And that map I showed you earlier was at the lower level areas. They concluded there was no environmental justice problem at Badin, essentially by diluting the demographics using the larger area.
You can manipulate statistics to say what you want, right? I think there's been some reporting on that. Well, people want to know what can be done. Do we need laws passed? Do we need is the EPA any help? What are the citizens groups kind of looking at for the next step?
Well, we've been focused on the environmental permits, the trying to ratchet down the limits. The only reason we're where we are today is because the Southern Environmental Law Center sued the state on behalf of the concerned citizens of West Badin. And they actually got some limits. I mean, I know someone commented, why are they monitoring, but they have no limits? Well, that's kind of the way the state regulatory agency rolls these days. And that is a huge problem for us because we want to see very strong effluent limits before the stuff even gets in the water. And the state has really relied on this dilution as the solution to pollution. And they really should be using more technology-based standards. And I don't know why Alcoa has been able to escape this responsibility. I think it has been that cozy relationship. We're hopeful that the state, with the public interest and support for doing something about this, which we just have to keep pressing, that they will do the right thing eventually. But if not, then we may need to take this back to EPA. I don't know, Reich, if you want to address that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's about people getting together and speaking out, and also it's about holding their elected officials accountable. All the laws are on the books, are there, available to both EPA and to the state of North Carolina. EPA has been asked by the state of North Carolina to keep them in charge, and EPA has therefore abdicated their responsibility. The state of North Carolina has not required what it could require, as it has required for other contaminant hazardous waste unlined dumps, as was mentioned in the chat. They have the power to do that. They've been unwilling to do that. So it's not the laws, it's the willingness to do so. And this is another aspect of environmental justice that has to be accounted for. Why is it that in some communities, these cleanups get done more quickly, and others they languish for years? And this is one of the systemic problems within EPA, and I think within DEQ, that has to be brought forward, and we cannot sugarcoat it. They have ignored this problem for way too long, and they've ignored the concerns of the people of West Badin and also all of those who use the lake.
So there was a question about how does this impact water quality further downstream or in other parts of the lake? Because, and this wasn't the question, but I know that there is a fancy golf course on one side of the lake. There's at the Old North State Club or something. And I just wonder if the impact and the pollution kind of is true in the whole lake. Is there any advocacy from folks who have, maybe more means, or has that not happened? Maybe the Colleen or Libby can answer that.
Yes, actually, I I think that our citizens group, we are taking advantage of the resources that we have, and I mean, I live in Badin, but several of our other members live up on the north end of the lake, and it does seem that we have some time. Time is a resource that a lot of people do not have, and so we've been able to pool our time. We've been able to put together the Facebook page, the website, and really do as much social media outreach as we can do. And I think that that is our strength, and how we can reach out and bring awareness. And it's really all we can do is make the people see what a big deal this is and get everybody on the same page. And if we can just get more and more people to get to the politicians and get to the lawmakers and get to the DEQ and all of the regulating bodies. I feel like the regulating bodies are fairly underfunded. And so even if they were going to be, holding people accountable, they don't have a whole lot of resources themselves to come after it. So things slip through the cracks. So that's another thing that we're going to be, trying to hold the people who are running for office. We're going to say we want more funding for environmental issues.
Well,
And
there's so
most of the members of Protect Badin Lake are from the Montgomery County side of the lake. And that is the wealthier side of the lake where the gated communities are. We've had a couple of board members from there that have engaged on this issue. Whenever the state considered allowing Alcoa to take the contaminated water from Outfall 5 and put it in the lake, that got their attention. And then I think also, as far as downstream concerns go, the ongoing concerns about the contamination of Little Mountain Creek, which flows into Lake Tillery and is Montgomery County's sole water supply. Once again, the levels seem safe now, right? But, going forward, who knows? And so, that has engaged a whole nother set of interest. And it's somewhat ironic that dynamic did really get people's attention more so than the 25, 30 years of struggle from the folks there in West Badin. And I think the other unique factor is the Badin community itself is a company town even today. And we have very little support on the ground there in the town of Badin itself in Stanley County.
Well, unfortunately, our time is at an end. You all have been such terrific panelists, and there's still more questions about, can we boycott Alcoa? Can we get the EPA? I mean, there's so many unanswered questions. Maybe we can bring some of these forward at our next event on March the 20th. And to lead us or to wrap it up in the amazing way that he's able to do, I'm going to bring us back to Reverend Dr. Rodney Sadler, who is with Union Presbyterian Seminary Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation. He is a professor, philosopher, thought leader, maker of good trouble, and also the co-founder and chair of the Reimagining America Project. So, Rodney, I'm going to let you try to wrap up this amazing discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for hosting that last part there. Talking about the questions that you asked were brilliant. I just want to say thank you to Reich, to Edgar, to Colleen, and to Libby for all that you added to this conversation. It was rich, it was moving. The facts that you brought forward were truly compelling for us to think about what we see going on and how this pollution takes place here. I kept thinking about, if this is going on here, what's going on throughout the rest of the country? How many other instances of cities that have been polluted do we see? And next, when we get together again, we'll talk a little bit more about the disproportionate effects of this. I want to say thank you to Reverend Janet Garner Mullins for serving as our MC for this evening and for doing that so ably. And I also want to say thank you to Reverend Jim Beard, because you put this thing together so astutely, so perfectly, to hear voices that need to be heard. And Ms. Valerie, thank you so much for weighing in and sharing a personal perspective. You and Dr. Shipman really touched our hearts in a way to help us remember that these are not just details and statistics. These are people on the ground who have been impacted by what Alcoa has done. I know for a fact that Duke Energy is being required to dig up many of its coal ash pits in order to line them, in order to make sure that they're sealed and that they don't leak contaminants. I think Alcoa should be held to a similar standard to make sure that the people of Badin Lake, West Badin, and East Badin, and all the regions downstream are also protected as we go forward. As we close out tonight, I just want to say, please come and join us again on the 20th of this March, where we'll have the second part of Poisoned Land and Poisoned Water, the legacy of environmental injustice and racism in a North Carolina company town. I invite you to register here. You can utilize this QR code to join, or you can also look at our Facebook, our YouTube, and you should be able to find information about that there as well. I encourage you to be a part of this and write letters to the Department of Environmental Quality, write letters to the governor, let them know that we need to hold Alcoa accountable. We need to protect the people of Badin Lake. We need to protect the people of North Carolina. As we close out tonight, let's do so with a word of prayer. Holy One, we are grateful for all that we have learned in this evening. It's been frightening to learn that we as human beings can be so callous and so careless, that we have often polluted your holy spaces, your land, your life-giving waters. And because of that, we've impacted people. People like Agnes have lost their lives prematurely. So many others have suffered and struggled from health concerns that are resulting from the carelessness and callousness of others. Help us to do better as we go forward. Help us to remember the disproportionate impacts on Black and brown folks so often that occur in these instances. As we move forward, Lord, we ask that you would use us for you to end not just environmental injustice, but all issues of racial disparity and injustice in your world. We call on you by many names, but in all of them, we ask that you would use us to bring forth your better world. Amen. God bless you all, and look forward to seeing you again on the 20th of March.